Chris Videll, welcome. Chris from Tag Cloud. Thank you for joining this evening to talk about your work, your music, and your contribution to the Fuzzy Panda Recording Company compilation TYMBAL. Thank you again. So to get started, if you could talk about sort of what kind of music you make, how you make it, and what your general approach is to making music.
Yeah, so generally speaking, and I was thinking about this a little bit lately. I've been doing this for about 10 years too, but what I'm really doing is kind of long form extended drone music of various sorts. And over the years, it's changed a lot in terms of the source material. It was like a fairly simple oscillator setup originally. Occasionally, some things like harmonium or Shruti box and some cheap keyboards, that kind of thing. More and more, I think, I don't know if it's partly for convenience and partly because it's what I'm into, but it's really become a little bit more kind of single source at this point, whether that be semi-modular or right now, probably for the last 9-10 months, modular, really, because I took the plunge on that. And I'm finding that to be really rewarding. So it's likely to be the sound source for some time. And what the form that's taking right now is really just like fairly long improvisation and not so much, some people take those, kind of edit them down, collage, whatever. The approach I've been taking lately is a little more like, okay, that one worked, I think I'll keep it and maybe tweak around the edges a little bit, and that one didn't work, so that, I'll toss that one out. As a side note, I've taken some of those and handed them to various collaborators and said, do you want to do anything with it? And gotten some pretty good results back. I guess we could talk about that part a little bit later too. But yeah, so it's slowly kind of been building things up toward hopefully a release. That's kind of the method at this point. Very different from, approaching the sort of compilation that, we're talking about here, I think.
Well, so going with your approach, do you sort of improvise and find things that you like, and then you go back and try to recreate them, or it tape's running and you got it and you say cut, and that's a wrap?
Well, as you know, I mean, you can't really recreate much of anything exactly in this world. You can sort of establish some parameters, though, and I think that's probably more what it looks like. And it might be, yeah, that didn't quite work this time, I'll try it again. And I didn't do the same thing, but that's really interesting. So that's actually a good thing. It's the happy accidents that, that sort of like move things along. You might get really close to one, it doesn't quite work, do it again and find a really profitable approach for later. So it's evolutionary, I guess.
Okay, so the happy accidents and the parameters, I think, are something that happy accidents happen, I think, in at least in my view, when you have a lot of limitations and you're stuck in a certain way, and all of a sudden something sort of pops up that you couldn't otherwise have achieved without those limitations. And in the compilation, you had a very short period of time to come up with a track. You had, I think, 2 weeks, and you were given an inordinate amount of samples of cicadas screaming hitting their little timbals as hard as they could in an effort to make probably millions of cicadas sampled for this recording, and field recordings in DC, Baltimore, and Montgomery County. When you were hit with those samples, and the limitation of time, what was your approach to, given the short time frame, to taking those samples and creating your track?
Yeah, and I think that is the challenge too, because it's so much material. It's like, and I tend to want to hear it all, and not necessarily practical here, but yeah, I think for some of those, some of those clips are what, like 30-40 minutes, whatever. I mean, you can get a flavor of it and not necessarily listen to the whole thing. And I think those are some of the ones that I was kind of just almost randomly hunting through and picking out, all right, here's a section that's interesting, let's drill down on that a little bit and grab maybe 5 or 10 minutes of that, what's in there. And I think you called my naturalist in a way too. So there's a balance between, like, I wanted to sort of preserve the voice, because it's just such a rich, wonderful thing with the cicadas. I mean, you don't get to, It's you want them to have their say, but at the same time, you want to steer it in some way that's something maybe they can't quite do. Add something to it, whether it's a pulse, whether it's I think I heard others talk about they found a little snippet in there they built on. I didn't quite go that far, I think, but what I ended up finding really was one of them had like some voices in it that are kind of buried in the track a little bit that I did, where it just kind of loops. And I was trying to sort of bring that out and make it sound like it's almost like an EVP thing, in a way, like, like this weird voice that kind of goes through a little bit. I don't know how much that really came out.
Human
But
voice?
there's,
Was it a human voice you heard?
yeah, actually, I think so.
Oh,
I think so. Anyway, it sounded sort of like somebody passing by whoever was recording, like, and so I thought, like, oh, that's interesting. Grab that, loop that a little bit. I kept some largely unedited portions of it, and then took some other portions and edited significantly. It's like stretching or changing pitch, that kind of thing, and then all kind of layered those together. And I mean, that's the basic approach. And it has a little bit of a, I don't want to say it's like an industrial thing, but it's almost, there's a little bit of a pulse to it that, just sort of, I hope anyway, moves everything along.
oh, absolutely. Your track, yeah, your track has a pulse, and it's funny because I was speaking earlier with James Wolfe and Raven Bauer Durham, and they both approached in different ways and ended up with tracks that are naturalist like yours. And Raven went using a computer, and James used his effects rig primarily. And so, what was your approach? Did you throw it through your, your semi-modular setup, or through your effects rig?
I did not. I am really not at that point yet. You know what I mean? So this was really more a question of put in an Audacity and its plugins, pretty
Mhm.
much at this point. And I think everybody's somewhat familiar with them. I haven't really searched for additional ones to add because I had some at one point, but this is a relatively new computer, so I'm just kind of going with what's there. You were talking about limitations before. I think it's interesting in a way to see what you can do with those sort of sort of canned plugins, just to see it forces you to be a little creative. At least I hope anyway.
Oh, that's
Um,
true. Absolutely on your track. It's funny you say you used Audacity because I had no idea. I figured you're using some sort of multi-tracking like Logic or Ableton or something like that, and it does not come through that you limited yourself much more, I think, by using Audacity, which is a great program and one I use a lot for mastering. But relying on Audacity is an interesting way to, I think, come up with a track. That's really cool. I didn't know. I've never tried to push it in that direction. It's interesting. Uh, so going back to the cicadas, I mean, it was a wall of. I mean, some of the recordings are essentially just a wall of pink noise. It's just there was a subtle pulse for some of them. Whatever the beats per minute, they're determined by the temperature or something like that. I don't know if they're like crickets in that regard, but you said you drilled down, and that's something I think is very interesting because I spoke to Chester Hawkins and he drilled down into individual, I think you referenced this, individual sounds. And Raven Bauer Durham drilled down into individual sounds to try to create a narrative of certain individual cicadas that she thought she was able to pick out. Did you, when you were drilling down, there's obviously a lot of fidelity in which you can drill down. You can get down to like a single beat of a timbal or hitting the whatever the
right.
yeah or yeah. And so how far down did you drill?
Not as far as they did, basically. I think I think it's more at the level of here's a small stretch. It might be 20, 30 seconds where, okay, what would that, think about what that would sound like looped. Is that interesting? Is this something you want to hear repeat? Just kind of think of it that way and then start to build on that a little bit. But it isn't necessarily that single beat with that single cicada sitting there somewhere in the middle of that chorus. Yeah, that's an interesting description. I mean, I don't, 2 weeks wouldn't have been enough for me, I think, to do that probably. So it was more. I think this was a little more sort of pulled back from the layer that they're doing.
Okay. And now in your creating of the track, did you think about sort of the temporal nature of the cicadas? Once every 17 years, Next time around is 2038. Last time was 2004. It's an interesting way to mark time. And did that come up at all in your thinking at all when you're either approaching the track, making the track, or any of that?
Not really, but at the time, but we had you had mentioned that when we were getting ready to do this, and it did strike me a little bit that because it is every 17 years. I mean, it's the temporal nature of it. I wonder how many more of them I'm going to get to see. I just kind of thought about that a little bit, kind of crossed my mind, and some of the environmental factors that you mentioned, you really kind of wonder what their future is in a way, and whether this will really be the same experience for other people later. And in that sense, it's great that this time and the last time around, I think people did a lot of it too. Like, the documentation's, even if this is kind of mixing and changing it in a way, the documentation is really important in a way. This could be a record for other people later, I guess.
Well, that's something, yeah. I mean, Noel Mueller of Grimoire Records recorded, I think, 4 hours of cicada samples in, I believe, Towson in Baltimore. And where he recorded them will be important, I think, in 17 years when he goes back to go hear them again and comparing them. And maybe he'll still have the same equipment and be able to do a pretty good A/B comparison. I think there is, some from the field recording source, there's definitely some documentary usefulness, but I'm not sure, what we've all done is all that useful in the annals of biology.
Thank God.
But yeah, I guess, I probably shouldn't ask that question about, were you thinking about the bugs when you made the track? Because so far the answer has been no, but those folks are actually trying to figure out, how to take pink noise and turn it into something musical, which I think you did a wonderful job with your track Brooding. Okay, so moving on from the Cicada compilation, do you have, I know you collaborate a lot, and you're actually, I think, technically on the compilation twice, right? As Tag Cloud, and also as part of That Cloud, with Jim Adams and Chris Matthews Larson. So do you have any ongoing side projects?
That is the major one at the moment, and we actually just completed a video with Jefferson Ogata for Robert Pepper's Ambient Chaos series. Since the pandemic started, he's been streaming like various things. They're getting close to 100. I'm really glad we were able to participate in that one. Should be a lot of fun. I'm not sure exactly when that's scheduled yet, but I know it's forthcoming. And we have some other stuff in the pipeline. I'm not sure how far along that is at this point, but I know there's another compilation thing in the works. That's great. It's Jim and Chris also work together as that, and since I've got the Tag Cloud thing, it's sort of involved into that, or That Cloud, as the case may be.
So going back to sort of your approach and what you're doing with Chris and Jim, what instruments are you playing?
Yeah, that's interesting too, because at first, some of the things I was doing with them, I was trying to find different approaches to work with them. Chris is doing probably more conventional instrumentation. Jim's got some little synths, and he's doing his prepared turntable, and he's got some backing tracks.
Now, when you say little synths, do you mean Korg little bits, or?
Actually, no, not this time around. He's going to kill me because I'm forgetting the exact name of this thing, but this is another little kit synth. I'm actually really impressed with it. I may have to look into it a little further. And so for this last one, Chris is playing guitar and keyboards. I was actually using the modular. What I was doing previously was I bought this sort of noise box from a guy in the Philippines that is very unpredictable, but really cool. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, and just fed that through some effects. And that's been kind of my participation, to date. But the modular is working really well with that. So that's probably going to be a little more of that in the future, I think. Less unpredictable, I hope. Yeah.
So as Tag Cloud, I know you have the Moog Mother 32. I know you have a Shruti box, and I believe you have a Grendel Drone Commander. Do you still have that last
Hasn't
one?
made an appearance for a while, but I'm hoping to work that back in sometime.
Well, if
Yeah.
you loan it to somebody for a while, I'm really, really excited
They
tomorrow.
made a pedal version of that not too long ago, by
Yeah,
the way.
I'm interested in that. I might have to find somebody who has that to see if it holds up to the original. But so you're set up. The instruments I just named. Well, the Moog is, I mean, it's semi modular, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So you're doing that with some drone boxes essentially. So you're kind of doing and let me know if I'm classifying this incorrectly. Sort of a rhythmic drone, sort of is it's not drone in that you're playing a note and holding it with minor variations in the oscillation or anything like that. You're approaching it with a more dynamic view. But
There's a bed of it. Yeah, I would say that's right.
so it sounds like what you're doing in that cloud involves different instruments and to an extent maybe more experimentation on your side, which you can do in a band situation. But as you talked about predictability, it can, when you're working with a new palette, you can have some happy accidents, but also some derailments. But so how is that the moving to the new instruments and going, and how's that affected your approach to the instruments you've been traditionally using as Tag Cloud?
I think maybe I've gotten a little bit more interest in doing more actual noise. I've always had in the back of my mind to try to do some kind of like true noise project at some point. I think that cloud stuff is a little more in that direction sometimes. Yeah, Jim actually contributed some really nice noise guitar to some of the stuff we're doing recently. So yeah, Jim, if you're listening, let's do more of that.
It'll be fun to interview Jim and Chris
Yes.
later.
See how they feel about that. Yeah. Yeah. It's I mean, I bring ideas back to, from that. I don't know how many of them I can actually implement, but I think if anything, it sort of just interests me in doing something that's a little more abstract and a little noisier. Yeah.
Okay. And so you said you've been working on a lot of stuff over the past 9-10 months. Is that more traditional Tag Cloud, but now influenced by your work with that cloud? Or is it, can you talk about what you've been working on and whether you have any upcoming releases or anything like that?
Or yeah, I think it's a more none of the above. Because I took the plunge on the modular, and it really just been, there's a learning curve with that, of course, and I'm still, the learning curve is still more ahead of me than behind me. So it's just spending a lot of time with it and just kind of jamming, really. But as I've gotten farther along, I've gotten to the point where I've been able to put together, a few 15-20 minute pieces that are like, okay, this actually works as a piece. I have 3 of those accumulated that like, that's going to be a release at this point. I really like how that worked out. And then actually I've actually done a few shows, and sort of now that everybody's coming back from the pandemic a little bit. And after 10 years of trying, I finally recorded a live show that I like. So that's probably going to go in with this release too. So it's going to be a really long, indulgent, probably 80-minute thing for some enterprising label. It's or the Fuzzy Panda, whatever it might be. I'm trying to get a plug in for you there. And then some of the smaller pieces that don't necessarily work, I've passed those along to a couple of collaborators and said, hey, would you like to do anything with them? And I know Dan Barbiero actually has a few where he has. So that's going to be a release in the future. He was actually really enthusiastic about it. So,
I find anything Dan touches is gold.
Yes. You had asked at some point what, if there was something I was particularly proud of. I think one of the things that I really am is the album that I did that I thought probably the least of. There are moments that I like and moments I don't like so much, but the moment I really love is I gave him a track and said, would you like to add, just add whatever you want to this. And he came back and it was absolutely beautiful. And he knew exactly what to do. And it's easily the best thing on there. And those are the things that I like about collaborating, something like that kind of stuff. But I think we have that, sometimes it works that way with us. He kind of knows what to do with what I give him. So I'm waiting to see what he turns back.
I think one of my favorite live sets was at the National Electronics Museum a couple of years ago, and Dan was playing with, I think, Ken Moore, and Ken was playing on a monosynth, and it was just fantastic. I mean, what Dan can do, yeah, he's great.
Well, I've always liked that. There's something about strings and electronics that just really works. And so, I'm really lucky to be able to do that occasionally. And they're, you know,
Well, yeah, and I think that Chris, because I've played obviously with you before, and you add there's nothing you add that doesn't make things better than the sum of the parts. And so it's always very fun to play with you because you're adding things either at sort of a static drone level or I remember at our set in Baltimore a couple of years ago, your synth was doing some sort of higher end things. You're almost, for the type of music we're doing, this is not going to sound like the right analogy, but you're almost dancing across what the rest of us were doing. And it was, I thought, really beautiful. And I really look forward to hearing every new release from you. So thank you. And so after this, we'll play your track Brooding. And so is there anything you'd like to add or talk about before we go to that?
Just thanks for putting this together. I'm really looking forward to hear the finished product. I've read about a lot of how people approach this differently, and I'm just curious to actually hear it. So,
well, it sounds great. There are some tracks on there that are absolutely stunning. There's one track that's really fun, the closing track by Love of Ruins, a gentleman from New York who is very close friends with Jeff Prosser, and he did not follow the drone instructions, but had a lot of fun with it and created a cicada-based techno track. He drilled down to the actual, like, making a kick drum out of one beat of the cicada. So it's a lot of fun. There are a lot of great tracks on the compilation. I'm so glad you were able to be a part of it. Thank you so much for joining this evening, Chris, and looking forward to hearing your next Tag Cloud release.
Thank you.